For more than 60 years, Mary Poppins has stood as one of Disney's most cherished treasures. A timeless classic where Julie Andrews' graceful voice and Dick Van Dyke's boundless charm brought pure cinematic magic to life. They gave us more than entertainment. They gave us the soundtrack of childhood, filling living rooms at Christmas time and echoing in schoolyards where children sang its unforgettable tunes. Families laughed with Bert the chimney sweep, marveled at every dazzling scene, and held close the dream of a nanny who could make the impossible feel real. Yet behind the joy we all remember, one truth remained unspoken, a secret from the set that weighed upon Dick Van Dyke's heart, a shadow that has only grown heavier in the twilight of his years. And now, as he nears a century of life, he dares at last to reveal what was hidden for so long, a revelation that turns cherished nostalgia into quiet tears. If Mary Poppins ever touched your childhood, we invite you to share your memories and rate this unforgettable masterpiece on a scale from 0 to 10, as together we uncover the untold secret behind the magic. Long before the world laughed with Bert the chimney sweep, young Dick lived inside another kind of story, one written not in joy but in concealment. A childhood where even the calendar itself lied to him, and the hush at home was not peaceful, but tragic, bruising rather than calming. He entered life on December 13, 1925 in West Plains, Missouri. Yet for nearly 2 decades, he was told he had been born in 1926, a gentle-sounding change that hid a cruel irony in the rigid morality of the 1920s. When he finally learned at 18 that the year had been altered to disguise his conception before marriage, the revelation was heartbreaking. A painful secret that made him feel as if his very existence had to be edited in order to be accepted. The family soon resettled in Danville, Illinois, a modest town that improbably gathered future luminaries under one roof. Classmates like Donald O'Connor of Singin' in the Rain, jazz legend Bobby Short, and even a cousin of Gene Hackman. To be surrounded by brilliance yet feel invisible was its own kind of cruelty, and among such sparks, young Dick felt like a shadow, shy, sensitive, uncertain if he possessed any light at all. "I was always trying to make people laugh," he would recall years later. "Maybe because I didn't want them to see how I really felt." His father was a traveling salesman, often gone for weeks. His mother a stenographer typing long hours to keep the family afloat during the unforgiving Great Depression, and the silence that filled their rooms was not gentle but heavy, aching, stretching the nights into something almost unbearable. In that silence, a boy learned survival by performance, turning smiles into shields and humor into armor, hiding wounds behind laughter because he feared the world would never accept the truth of his sadness. School gave him brief pockets of air, choir rehearsals where his voice finally belonged to something larger, drama club moments where a script told him who to be, fleeting moments when he was no longer invisible. Drawn to comfort others, he served in church, teaching Sunday school and later helping as a young deacon, offering guidance he himself was still desperately craving. For a time, he even dreamed of the pulpit, of becoming a Presbyterian minister, imagining that perhaps kindness and faith could mend what the world had cracked open inside him. And yet, the ache remained, the sense that life had stamped him with an asterisk, as if the simplest truths, his year, his worth, his very place, were forever in question. That is why the smallest kindnesses mattered so deeply, why a laugh felt like mercy, why making others feel safe became his private covenant with the world. For a sensitive boy, this was not merely formative, it was tragic alchemy. The heartbreaking transformation of loneliness into care, of shame into compassion, of secrecy into a vow to give joy away freely. Years later, when he would dance across a whimsical London of chimneys and songs, audiences would marvel at the buoyant grin and the spring in his step, but they could not see the quiet cost behind it. The cost of a childhood where love was scarce and safety uncertain. His comedy was never only performance. It was survival, redemption, a defiant answer to the cruel idea that love must be earned by hiding the truth of who you are. The boy who once felt invisible would one day be recognized by the world, but only because the shadows first carved him. And in being carved by them, he discovered the most enduring magic of all: how to make hurt feel lighter for everyone else. The war was raging, but for Dick Van Dyke, the first battle was with his own body. A lanky, fragile boy of 18 in 1944, desperate to serve his country, yet carrying the same haunting weight of never feeling enough. At 6'1", yet barely 135 pounds, he was heartbreakingly rejected by the Army Air Forces not once, but twice. Dismissed as too weak, too insubstantial to stand among men marching off to fight. The cruel irony of being turned away when all he longed for was to prove himself deepened the wounds of childhood. Whispering again that he was not enough, that he was invisible even in uniform. Determined to change the verdict, Dick stuffed himself with bananas and gallons of water, stumbling to the scales bloated and desperate, forcing the numbers up to the bare minimum of 141 pounds. Years later, he recalled with a bittersweet laugh, "I barely made the weight, only by stuffing myself with bananas." A confession that revealed both the comedy and the quiet humiliation of that moment. It was a tragic and almost comic picture all at once. A boy straining his body to prove his worth, so heartbreakingly fragile that he had to trick the scale just to be seen. Accepted at last, he trained as a radio announcer. But fate prepared a far crueler test, an assignment as a tail gunner, one of the deadliest posts in the entire war, where survival was measured not in months, but in weeks. For a moment, death hovered close. The future of Dick Van Dyke hanging on the trigger of a tragic lottery that could have erased him before the world ever laughed at his grin. But destiny twisted, sparing him the gunner's seat and steering him instead into the special services. A unit charged not with killing, but with keeping soldiers alive in spirit. There, on makeshift stages lit by dim bulbs, Dick sang, danced, and performed skits, his lanky frame leaping and tumbling, his voice reaching weary men who had forgotten how to smile. He discovered in those fragile nights something far more powerful than a rifle: the heartbreaking magic of laughter, the ability to lift broken souls and remind men standing at the edge of death that joy still existed. For the first time, he felt not invisible but vital, not a shadow but a spark, as applause from tired soldiers told him he carried a gift the world needed. That cruel rejection at the enlistment office, that tragic brush with death as a nearly assigned gunner, now revealed themselves as the painful but necessary first steps of a path toward something greater. The stage. What had once felt like humiliation and despair became the strange alchemy of fate, turning weakness into a calling and vulnerability into strength. In the special services, Dick Van Dyke was not just passing time. He was being born as a performer, learning that his survival and the survival of others could rest on the same fragile gift of laughter. And though the war raged on, inside him another battle was being won. The battle to believe that his joy had value, that his pain had purpose, and that even the frailest boy could rise to become the heartbeat of a crowd. After the war, Dick Van Dyke did not step into fame, but into anonymity. A young man adrift, carrying the memories of stages lit for soldiers, yet unsure if laughter could still save him in peacetime. In the late 1940s, he found his first fragile foothold behind a microphone at WDAN in Danville, Illinois, his voice reaching invisible audiences through the static of a small-town radio station. It felt like maybe someone out there was listening, he later remembered, hinting at how even then he was searching for connection in a world that had rarely made him feel seen. Radio gave him rhythm, timing, and a whisper of belonging, but the spotlight he craved remained distant. In 1947, he teamed with Phil Erickson to form Eric and Van the Merry Mutes, a mime comedy duo that lip-synced to records and performed in dusty nightclubs on the West Coast. It was work that barely paid, shows that often went unnoticed. But for Dick, It was survival. A chance to shape loneliness into laughter, to rehearse the art of healing even when the crowd was thin. Years slipped by in obscurity until September 5th, 1954, when fate cracked open a door called Chance of a Lifetime. Dick was set to perform a skit with a tangled microphone cord, but backstage fear nearly undid him. He froze, hiding in a bathroom stall, convinced he could not go on. A fellow contestant coaxed him out, pressed a flask into his hand, and reminded him that sometimes you step forward not because you are ready, but because you cannot bear to vanish again. Trembling, he walked on stage, and as the cord wrapped around his legs, his clumsy dance became comedy gold, the audience roaring with laughter, the judges captivated by the lanky boy who turned panic into magic. "The laughter lifted me," he recalled, "and for the first time I thought maybe I belonged here." That night changed everything. Invitations followed. CBS's The Morning Show. Panelist appearances on To Tell the Truth. Moments where America glimpsed the charm that would soon define him. Yet even in these bright beginnings, controversy stalked. When he unmasked a CIA imposter on air, critics cried foul and accused the program of being rigged. CBS had to defend both the show and Dick himself, a trial by fire that tested whether the boy from Danville could withstand the scrutiny of national fame. But instead of crumbling, he laughed, improvised, and won over audiences who sensed that his humor was not scripted. It was survival. It was sincerity. It was the resilience of a man who had learned to smile through silence. If television cracked the door, Broadway blew it wide open, and Hollywood soon followed. In 1959, Dick Van Dyke made his Broadway debut in The Girls Against the Boys, a short-lived production that closed after only 16 performances, a heartbreak that might have crushed a lesser soul. But from that rubble rose a miracle. During the auditions for Bye Bye Birdie, choreographer Gower Champion watched Dick's nervous soft shoe shuffle and saw not clumsiness, but a rare spark of comic grace. On the spot, Champion offered him the lead role of Albert Peterson, despite Dick's protests that he could not dance. "We'll teach you," Champion replied, and in that simple act of faith, a star was born. When Bye Bye Birdie opened in 1960, audiences erupted with laughter and love for the lanky, fumbling, yet tender-hearted Peterson. Critics hailed his timing as genius, and in 1961 he won the Tony Award for Best Featured Actor in a Musical, a triumph that turned the invisible boy from Danville into Broadway's brightest light. That same year, television came calling again, this time with a script by Carl Reiner reimagined as The Dick Van Dyke Show. Paired with Mary Tyler Moore, he embodied Rob Petrie, a husband, father, and comedy writer whose life danced between workplace antics and heartfelt domestic moments. The show was daring for its time, blending marital equality, clever flashbacks, and even surreal dream sequences into something America had never seen. In its first season, the ratings faltered, but by the second, it had captured the nation, winning 15 Emmy Awards across its 5-year run and etching itself into the very DNA of American television. What made it revolutionary was not just the writing, but the way Dick's physical comedy, his pratfalls, his Ottoman stumble, his ability to turn accidents into art, became the heartbeat of the series. Behind the charm, however, lingered the quiet truth. Dick was still battling insecurity, still masking the old ache with laughter, still fearing that one day the world would discover he was not as good as they thought. And yet, in the glow of the cameras, his pain became America's comfort. His laughter became medicine for a country in need of levity during turbulent years. By the mid-1960s, with Bye Bye Birdie on screen and The Dick Van Dyke Show a household staple, Dick Van Dyke had not only reached the summit of his career, he had redefined what comedy could be, shaping the very language of sitcoms that future generations would follow. The show's rhythms, its humanity, and its wit became a template for television itself, inspiring everything from Cheers to Friends, a legacy so enduring that even decades later, Writers and actors still point back to Rob Petrie's living room as the place where modern comedy was born. For Dick, the boy who once feared he would never be enough, it was the sweetest irony of all. That by turning insecurity into laughter, he had become a legend whose light would never dim. After Broadway's standing ovations and television's 15 Emmys, the world was already in love with Dick Van Dyke. But nothing could have prepared him or us for what came next. A Disney masterpiece that lifted him to immortality while breaking him in ways no spotlight could hide. In 1964, Dick Van Dyke seemed to stand at the very summit of Hollywood's Golden Mountain, dancing across London rooftops as Bert the chimney sweep in Disney's Mary Poppins. The film was dazzling, revolutionary, a kaleidoscope of magic where Julie Andrews' flawless soprano soared like a hymn from heaven, and Dick's boundless charm turned chimneys into playgrounds. For millions of families, it was joy itself. A nanny who flew with an umbrella, a chimney sweep who laughed through soot and smoke, songs that seemed stitched into the very fabric of childhood. The Sherman Brothers had written melodies that would echo across living rooms for generations. Feed the birds, chim chim cherry, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Songs so radiant that even Walt Disney himself admitted to weeping when he first heard them. On screen, Van Dyke was the picture of confidence and mischief, a man who could leap into chalk drawings, waltz with penguins, and sing as if gravity itself adored him. To the public eye, he had never shined brighter. This was immortality in Technicolor, a crown jewel of the Disney empire, and for a brief, shimmering moment, it seemed as if Dick Van Dyke had achieved the impossible dream. Eternal laughter captured on film. But behind that glow lay a truth so strange it bordered on cruel irony. Dick had to pay to play. His heart was set not only on Bert, but also on the role of Mr. Dawes Sr., the frail, trembling bank director, an elderly character he believed he could embody with wit and empathy. Disney hesitated, doubtful he could stretch so far, but Dick begged for the chance and even offered to do it for free. Even that wasn't enough. Walt Disney himself insisted he donate $4,000 to the newly founded California Institute of the Arts in exchange for the part. Decades later, Van Dyke laughed about it in interviews, saying, "I paid him to let me do the part I offered to do for free. I'm still scratching my head over that." The audience chuckled, but beneath the joke was something heartbreakingly humiliating. That even at the height of his stardom, when he should have been celebrated without question, he felt he had to buy his worth. It was as if success was still conditional, as if the boy from Danville had never really been enough, as if Hollywood itself still required him to purchase permission to exist. And then came the wound that would cling to his legacy forever: the Cockney accent. Tasked with embodying a London chimney sweep, Dick threw himself into the role with vigor, but his dialect coach was Irish and woefully unprepared to teach the rhythms of East London. The result was a sound so muddled, so off-key, that it became infamous. Critics mocked it, audiences chuckled at it, and in 2003, it was even voted the second worst accent in film history. To this day, jokes about the Van Dyke Cockney still echo in pop culture. He himself confessed with a wry smile. It was atrocious, but the truth ran deeper. Every jeer carried a sting, a reminder that while Mary Poppins gave him immortality, it also gave him a scar, one he could never quite laugh away. Even in 2018, when he reprised a cameo in Mary Poppins Returns, he worked fiercely with a dialect coach, muttering, "They won't laugh at me this time." Those words revealed a wound that had never healed, the voice of a man still haunted by an old humiliation, still wrestling with the shadow of a performance that millions loved but critics never forgave. If Dick's accent was one wound, another came from the woman who had birthed Mary Poppins herself, P.L. Travers. To her, Disney's version was a betrayal, a sugared-up caricature of the stern, commanding nanny she had written. She loathed the animation, the softened tone, even the casting. Of Dick, she was particularly unkind. She dismissed both him and Andrews, saying they were too sweet, too whimsical, too wrong. At the film's premiere, while audiences wept with joy, Travers sat in tears of fury, demanding the animation sequence be removed. Disney's reply was icy and final. "Pamela, that ship has sailed." For Van Dyke, who had poured his soul into the film, this rejection was quietly devastating. To be loathed by the author of the very world he was helping bring to life. It was a blow deeper than reviews, a denial at the core of his art. What the world embraced as magic, the creator condemned as mockery. And Dick, caught in the middle, bore the brunt of her disdain. And yet, the harshest storm of Mary Poppins was not in the studio, nor in the press. It raged inside Dick Van Dyke himself. Beneath the leaps, the twinkle, the endless grin, he was fighting a battle with alcohol, drinking not for pleasure but for survival. Shy by nature, plagued by insecurity, he found in the bottle a way to loosen his tongue, to quiet the noise of doubt, to be the man everyone expected. But it came at a cost. Nights of despair, mornings of shame, stretches of depression where he felt himself slipping toward an abyss. "I was in deep trouble," he would later admit, confessing that at times even the will to go on felt thin. And still, on set, none of this showed. His feet flew in flawless routines. His smile glowed brighter than the lights. His laughter carried children into worlds of wonder. It is one of Hollywood's cruelest ironies, that while Dick Van Dyke was making the world believe in magic, he was quietly wondering if his own light might go out. Even now, decades later, the paradox of Mary Poppins lingers, a film that crowned him immortal but carved its scars into his soul. For every child who found joy in Bert's dance, there was a man backstage trembling under the weight of humiliation, rejection, and silence. And yet, through it all, he gave the world a gift that time has not dimmed. That is the quiet miracle of Dick Van Dyke, that even in his darkest battles, he chose to make others believe in light. At nearly a century of life, Dick Van Dyke carries with him not only the applause of decades past, but also the invisible scars left by Mary Poppins. For all the laughter, the dancing, the technicolor wonder, that film carried wounds that never truly faded. An accent mocked for generations, a role he had to pay for, the sting of rejection from the very author who gave birth to the story. And yet, in a twist both tender and poetic, it is Mary Poppins itself that still keeps his name alive. 6 decades later, children who never saw the 60s write him letters in crayon and pencil, telling him they watched the movie over and over. What was once humiliation has become redemption, a bridge across time, proving that joy endures longer than judgment. His stage now is no longer a London rooftop or a Broadway spotlight, but a sunlit villa in Malibu, a home where life moves in quiet rituals. He wakes beside Arlene Silver, his wife, his joy, 46 years his junior, but his equal in laughter and care. In a world quick to sneer at such love, theirs has become something rare, a testament that true connection defies convention. Their mornings unfold with coffee and shared breakfasts, music drifting through the rooms, and laughter that still rings like it once did on sound stages. For a man who once lived in the storm of Hollywood, this is the gentlest encore. Even now, at 98, his spirit refuses to grow old. 3 times a week, he trains his body, stretching, practicing yoga, coaxing strength from muscles nearly a century in the making. "I want to be able to get back up when I fall," he jokes, half laughter, half warrior's creed. His diet is modest. His evenings end with one small luxury: a scoop of vanilla ice cream drizzled with chocolate sauce. After a lifetime of dizzying fame and private storms, perhaps the sweetest treasures truly are the simplest ones. Still, time cannot be silenced. In June 2025, fans felt an ache when he missed a long-planned reunion. It was not pride that kept him away, but the undeniable weight of age. Around the same time, he was forced to miss the Emmy Awards, where he had been scheduled to present. Yet even in absence, his presence was felt. Beloved, missed, remembered. The boy who once had to stuff himself with bananas to tip the Army's scale now stood as living proof that frailty can coexist with greatness. And then came miracles no one foresaw. In 2023, disguised behind a costume on The Masked Singer, his voice stunned a generation too young to know him firsthand. In 2024, his face appeared in Coldplay's All My Love, a title that seemed less like a song than a whispered biography. And before 2025 ends, he will release 100 Rules for Living to 100, a book not about fame or vanity, but about endurance, laughter, and the stubborn courage it takes to carry kindness across a century. The awards, Emmy, Tony, Grammy, the Kennedy Center Honors, stand as glittering footnotes. But if you ask him, what matters? His reply is heartbreakingly simple. I just want to be remembered for making people laugh. That, more than the red carpets or the golden statues, is his true monument. Colleagues call him a teacher. Fans call him a comfort. One admirer wrote, "Watching him felt like being hugged by someone who knew exactly how much you needed it." That is the legacy. That is the confession. Not only that the magic of Mary Poppins was born from struggle, but that struggle itself became magic. Pain transformed into laughter, humiliation into hope, silence into kindness. He didn't just make the world laugh, he made it feel safe. And in a century often defined by cruelty, that sincerity is his most radical triumph. Now, as the music softens and the lights dim, Dick Van Dyke does not fade. He glows. His life is no longer measured by roles or ratings, but by the smiles he sparked and the burdens he lifted. For those who ask whether his legacy will last, the answer is already written. It lives in every child still watching Mary Poppins, in every adult who once believed that laughter could lift them higher than the rooftops. If Mary Poppins ever lit up your childhood, if Dick Van Dyke ever brought a smile when you needed it most, tell us what it meant to you. Your words keep his magic alive for the next generation.